Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby. And as we roll into August, this time of year, whether you have children or your kids are all grown up, I don't have kids and I'm 51, going to be 52 in a couple of weeks. So I don't go to school anymore, but I always think of it as school time. It's that back to school. You'll see ads everywhere. Everyone's preparing. I know for myself, I don't know, maybe I'm a weirdo. Well, I know I'm a weirdo, but like in a good way, I hope. I always think of like school memories. I have a lot of good back to school memories because I used to go school shopping for when you go to a Catholic school like I did, you don't have too much freedom. Like you can choose between like white and maroon socks or, a certain issued sweater from the school. Do you want it as a V-neck or a cardigan? So many different options. But I would love going shopping for shoes with my grandmother, who would buy those for me because one, the experience of being with my grandmother, but two, like that one thing that I could show off my personality through my shoes. But so I do have good memories around this time of year. And whether you're a mom getting your kids ready for school or, you're a parent of someone who's going to college, I think you'll be especially interested in this topic because this week I'm going to be talking with Margaret Pizer from Tsunami Self-Defense. And if you've listened to my podcast before, you may or may not have heard my conversation last fall. I believe we aired it in August with Robert Thomas, who is the founder of Tsunami Self-Defense. And we spoke about a lot of important tips about safety. Now, granted, it's important for everyone to be safe, but my focus on this podcast is women, and it's important for women of all ages to be safe. But I think what we want to talk about specifically, and put maybe a little bit more heavy focus this week on, is young women going to college, whether they're staying at home and going locally or going away to school. It's important that they're prepared because they're going to encounter some different scenarios that maybe they never have before. And we want to give them some tips to stay safe. So welcome, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, and we had Robert on, and I know Robert from doing improv with him years ago. And I did actually meet you in person. I did take a workshop once that Robert had held, or Tsunami Self-Defense held at, I believe it was Roll Call in Scranton. Sometimes you guys will have workshops there. And you guys are doing incredible work there. So I did get to meet you there in person. But tell for the listeners just a little bit about what brought you to Tsunami Self-Defense, your role and your training. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So I started training at Tsunami Self-Defense back in, I want to say 2016. I went with a couple of my sisters and friends. We took some private classes just to get a kind of overall sense of self-defense perspective, and specifically how to defend yourself just in kind of a street defense for women program. And right from the bat, I loved it. Me and my sisters, we own a yoga studio in Old Forge, and right off the bat, we had Robert come in with Becky and Alyssa and teach classes to our students and customers there that were about parking lot defense and more of your everyday scenarios and reality-based situations you may get in. And from that point, I just never really stopped training. Every time if he had even a co-ed class or a weapons class, any kind of catered class that he was offering, whether it would be at his studio in Taylor or in Roll Call, I joined in on those throughout the years until around, it was 2019. He asked me, because I had been training for a while, he was like, I have a group of women that come in on Tuesday nights, and it's an every Tuesday night class who, people who are experienced in our self-defense programs, if you want to join in, like, you're more than welcome to. So I was a part of that community on Tuesday nights, our Tuesday women's class. From 2019, we were virtual through COVID, and then we got brought back on in 2021. And I was certified as a level 1 women's street defense instructor through Tsunami at that time in, I think it was November of 2021, with a group of women that were in that class. So we've been, there's a group of maybe 5, 6, 7 of us currently that help assist and also teach the women's classes. And my specialty is in particularly the introductory beginners program of our street defense for women.
So there are just to give a little background too on, obviously there's all kinds of different defense classes that are out there. I know years ago when oh my gosh, it's probably 20 years ago, I remember taking a course that was based in like Kung Fu, and they were teaching like maneuvers, excuse me, like, how to punch in the groin and but they were incorporating moves from Kung Fu that, you didn't have to be studying it or whatever. So there's all different kinds. So I know that Robert talked a little bit about what his is based in. Is it a combination? Is it based on a certain national program, or is it like a mixture?
So we are a big melting pot. So Robert and Becky, in particularly, the two of them really kind of created the self-defense programs, and specifically the women's self-defense programs together. And so it's a blend of different martial arts practices, as well as combatives and trainings that he has taken specifically with law enforcement and people in the self-defense reality-based community across the country, and specifically for women's issues. So we have kind of two big kind of conglomerate classes for women. We have our street defense, and then we have our reduce the risk, which was called Girls on Guard for a time period. It's a program that was developed by, I think it was Rory Miller. If he corrects me, he'll correct me on that one. But that one is specifically for sexual assault defense and mitigation. And we call our program, which is a blend of that one, as well as other things that Robert and Becky have come up with over the years, reduce the risks now.
Okay. And today we're going to focus on women's self-defense, but you guys do offer, I know you've had some recent ones that are co-ed, right? So self-defense mixture, and you go to corporations, organizations. So you don't just offer workshops that the public can attend. You've done it, I believe, even for conferences, for college campuses, those kinds of things. So that is something that if folks want to look at the website after, I'll put that in the show notes, they can reach out to you guys to learn more about that. But let's focus on the women's self-defense. Before I hit the record button, you were sharing something that's really important right now when this is airing. And as I said before at the intro, it is that back to school time. This time now, you said through, I believe, November, like around Thanksgiving, is called often referred to as the red zone. Is that right? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the red zone, some college campuses have other names for it, but it's most well known as the red zone. And essentially what that means is from mid-August all the way until Thanksgiving break, over 50% of campus sexual assaults occur during that time period of the year, which is something that is really interesting to think about. That is the time of the year when everybody is going back to school. Unfortunately, a lot of those particular cases come from the age bracket of freshman to sophomore, more predominantly than junior to senior. So there's a lot of events going on from August to November where you have your younger students coming in, trying a lot of different things, meeting a lot of new people, being in a very unfamiliar environment. And that unfamiliarity, unfortunately, can be manipulated and kind of preyed upon. So we tend to, specifically this time of year, really push young girls specifically going off to college to take a few of our classes to really just get your mind in that perspective of just being aware of your surroundings and certain things that you can do just to be aware and reduce your risk and avoid any situation that may be unwanted or uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, and that is so important because, we might, maybe they're coming from a background where they've taken martial arts and that's great, or maybe they have parents who are vigilant about reminding them, but everyone can benefit from these moves. I know I only took the one class, and years ago I had taken the Kung Fu class, but I know that it is important that I would like to do another and at least a refresher, because we do need to be prepared. You don't want to think that way. You don't want to be scared, but you do want to be prepared. And it is important, especially as you're mentioning, for the young girls who it's their first time away from home in some cases. They may not even have a friend already, so they're making friends. And that's where sometimes you're trusting people and maybe the person has other motives, or you go to a party and you think you can trust people, but things happen. And it is important for them to learn some basic things that they can use, not just the moves, but I know last year Robert had said just even tips that you can help provide them with, like certain things to be on the lookout for, right?
Absolutely. And I honestly, what kept me going with Tsunami self-defense programs, and now I teach it, is not necessarily the physical aspects of it, but learning everything that envelops self-defense. So a lot of the psychological and mental things you need to think about, all the soft skill avoidance techniques and pre-incident indicators and de-escalation tactics are things that I use in my everyday life. And that's not to say that like I encounter, a lot of danger, so to say, in my life, but there's just certain things where you're interacting with strangers or people you're just getting to know, and being able to be solid and understand your own boundaries so that you can handle situations without compromising yourself or second guessing your intuition. That to me is what has kept me going in this program more than anything else. And what I would want to instill in women specifically, because a lot of times we are taught to second guess our intuition, or we're taught or, given circumstances over time where it's like, oh, well, give this person a chance, or it could be, you're just seeing things a certain way, or you're too rigid, and we, get bombarded with kind of all these labels and things like that. And especially being in that 18, 19, 20 age bracket where you are still kind of in that big self-discovery stage of life, it's important to check in with yourself and understand what your boundaries are. And if they change, that's okay. But making sure that you know those things so that no matter what situation you're in, you're more prepared and proactive instead of paranoid or getting paralyzed or frozen in a situation because you never really thought about what you would do in that situation.
Yeah. And that's, we could have a whole conversation on, I think the way that girls, it is changing, but the way that girls are even raised to be polite, to be nice, to be this or that. And, as you mentioned, we second guess ourselves because it's like, if someone does offer something, whether it's a ride or like, you want to be polite, you want to be nice. Oh, was I being a bitch? Was I this or that? Or do they think that and ultimately you have to be concerned about your own safety and, and use, as you mentioned, boundaries. And it is important, especially as they're young, that maybe not fully being formed with, those boundaries, but having some guidance, and tips from you guys and the moves too. And I think that's important because, I sometimes think about that myself, about what would I do in a situation, because the training is great, but unless you've been in the situation, like, I honestly don't know. I always like to believe that I'm a badass, right? Like I'm going to fight like hell, or, maybe you're not supposed to. I know if you're being mugged or whatever, let go of the valuables and don't, whatever. But I like to believe it, but I don't know. I don't know what would happen. And hopefully I won't have to find out, but learning is important so that you do have at least some kind of things that hopefully will play in your mind if something were to happen.
Absolutely. And just being like kind of open to the topic matter itself, which, any kind of self-defense topic matter can be really heavy. It could be something that, obviously is uncomfortable to even think about or perceive. A lot of people, will go through that mind stage of being like, well, it's not going to happen to me. Like, I know you mentioned like growing up in a small town kind of situation where people are like, oh, everything's one way, so it's never going to happen to me. And one of our biggest principles that we do teach is that the body can't go where the mind hasn't already been, at least not successfully. And so the way that we approach self-defense is not necessarily, we can't prepare you and simulate every single possible scenario that you may encounter or never encounter, but we can at least talk about them. We can at least introduce certain things and principles for which you can remember and, almost through muscle memory, be able to work yourself through a situation and solve your way out of it in the best way that you can in a moment. And that's super important.
Yeah. And there are, I wish I had remembered, but Robert had mentioned, I think they're P's, but they're of safety. What the principles that you guys, I know there's some real basics too that you guys, about being prepared, but there's other ones. Am I like even getting close to what, do you know what I'm referring to or no? Because I forget what they were.
We do, for our women's programs, we have the 4 P's. So the 4 P's, and I think I may have kind of alluded to them when I was talking earlier, is that we want to make sure that you're proactive and prepared, not paranoid or paralyzed by fear. So we want to be able to observe kind of our environment and what's going on, whether we feel something that's a little bit off or we don't at all, and then be able to process what's happening in our particular environment, and then make choices after that point to make sure that we are in a safe position ourselves. So the 4 P's, like I said, we're everything that we do is to make sure that you're not thinking, you know, every corner you turn, every person you meet is somebody that's suspicious, but things that you can look out for and just have a knowledge of, so that if you ever have that gut feeling or that kind of intuitive sense kick in saying like, something's a little bit off here, you have something to go off of to not second guess that point.
Okay. Yeah, that was it. I knew, and I'm thinking, maybe she just said them. There we go. Yeah, yeah, that's important. Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting too. You talked about like a lot of it too is not just the moves, but like the psychological. And you know, I've reached out to Robert. I think it was probably even last year around this time. I do women's comedy nights where it's only female comedians, only females in the audience, and I'm pretty. I guess some people might see it as rigid. I see it as trying to stick to what I'm trying to create, which is a safe environment for women to feel comfortable. And and in fact, I've called him last year to ask, what do you think about this? I had a gentleman buy a ticket, and I have in the past given refunds because I do want to keep it safe.
Yeah.
But talking to Robert for his perspective of even the wording, because he's like, well, you can't assume everyone's, you know, like up to no good, you know, so to speak. But you know, you're entitled to say, hey, this is for women. You may not be comfortable. And he did help me with the wording because he also said you don't want to maybe set this guy off or trigger him like by saying like there's an assumption that I think he's going to do something. I just really didn't want to change the environment. And I did give the person a refund and it was fine. But it was interesting to have that conversation. And I think, and it's not just about like for my case, but even I think that might be something important even for young women as they're having different communication with men. That I don't know if that's something that you guys ever go over, but like someone who might be giving them a hard time. Maybe they went out on a date or maybe they don't want to date that person, but the person now is like texting them too much or kind of maybe harassing them and they don't know where to draw the line. You know, is this person just being a nuisance or are they potentially harmful? And it's hard to know the difference, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And we do teach a lot of ways to, I personally, or I don't know if Robert really uses this terminology, but I kind of like to say, trying to neutralize a situation and be able to step back and say things like, okay, you know, and one, am I comfortable with what's going on? If I'm not, is it a me? Is it something just because that's how I feel and I haven't communicated that yet? Or is it something that I have communicated and it's getting crossed? So if you can answer those two questions, then you kind of have a good framework as to where you're going to go with this. If you want to keep things on a little bit more of a friendly level, let's say with somebody, you know, for a college girl that, like you said, has maybe gone on a date or two, you know, things aren't really like, you know, working out. So maybe they just kind of ghosted, I know is like a term that people use these days, or just decided not to really engage for a while. And they're, you know, starting to, you know, answer your DM on social media, text, they're trying to like ask your friends where you are, what's going on. You know, maybe it sounds a little bit hostile and you're not okay with it. That would be a situation where you would want to, and I would even personally say in writing, communicate as to why you may not be interested anymore, instead of just trying to ignore the situation altogether out of an uncomfortable feeling that you have. And it not alienating people as well. I think like I don't totally know the situation you had at your comedy show, but yeah, trying to make sure, and that's an avoidance tactic too. A lot of times we want to kind of like clap back really fast, or if we feel like we're being insulted, we want to insult like right off the bat. That's like the knee-jerk reaction because you're mad or you're upset something took place. But a lot of times when you do, and I'm not going to say every single time, but a lot of times when we do go right into an attack mode, you're giving away your power to that person, which a lot of times if they do have malintent, that's exactly what they want. So we teach a lot, and one of my favorite things to teach is when we talk about catcalling in particularly, because everybody has their own ways of thinking about catcalling. A lot of women have gone through this experience themselves in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of the answers are like, I might turn around and, make a face or, make a gesture or say something like, leave me alone and all that jazz. And from our perspective with our training is the second that you show an emotional response, they've already gotten exactly what they were looking for. So the best thing that you could do in those situations is completely, keep a straight face. You could show them that you saw what they were doing, but then move right along unbothered. And that's something that we teach, because you're most likely going to avoid any kind of further interaction with the person that isn't worth your time anyway in that framework. So those are a couple different ways you would deal with men in particular scenarios. And that's why, again, I love this training, because it's something that I can use every single day, where I can check in with myself and be like, well, how would I want to respond here? Is it a response that needs a very clear command to take place and be set on the record? Is it a situation where I can just, be neutral and, just give a nice response and walk away? Or is it something that I don't even need to bring any attention or energy into? We teach all three of those in different situations.
I want to follow up to something that you said there. You said sometimes our knee-jerk reaction, like if we're something negative or attack, we want to attack back, but we're giving away our power. So is that because if it's that all that emotion, we're just not in the right state of mind to protect ourselves, or because we're giving them what they want and that's allowing them to be in control? Just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of us, myself definitely, you're hurt, so you want to hurt back, but as you're saying, don't attack back because you're giving away your power.
Mm-hmm. So in what I was talking about specifically with catcalling is you're dealing with somebody already who is, whatever response you give them is not going to change them. It's not going to change their mind as to what they're doing. It's not going to stop them from catcalling. It's not going to change who they are. And this is something that for me, it was hard to kind of come to terms with, because we have this world that we deserve to feel respected in at all times. And we do feel, or I, have always felt this calling where, like, if something's wrong, if something somebody's doing is wrong, it needs to be called out. And with self-defense, you've kind of learned when's the right time to do that. And a lot of times it's being able to discern, is it going to be worth it to try and reach that person or not? Or are you just going to be giving them exactly what they want, is just getting off on your anger and your frustration and the fact that you've been objectified in some way, shape, or form? So it's really more so choosing your battles at the right time. And that takes time, and it takes, I think, a lot of practice and a lot of work to get to that point where you yourself can figure out, okay, when is my time frame to do those things? When is it to step back? When is it to just ignore it altogether? I've have younger sisters who are in college and they're friends, and I've talked to them before. And we, again, like I said, we have this way that we absolutely are meant to be treated. We have to educate men. We have to educate people on the best way to respect women of all ages. But the fact of the matter also is that the world that we live in isn't that ideal world yet. So we have to work with also the reality of the situation that we're in. And like I said, choose your battles when it's necessary for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true.
I wouldn't say it's a problem that we have that we want, like, as a woman wanting to call it out or wanting to hurt somebody back is necessarily a bad reaction to have, but it's simply just taking it a little step further and being like, well, is this going to impact or not? Is this going to make a difference or not? Is this going to validate me and bring my power back? Or is it just going to hand it over to them where in their minds, they're just going to churn it up a certain way? So that's really something I never thought about before I took Tsunami self-defense, and then these topic matters and discussions are made, and it's like, oh shoot, like I never would have thought of it that way, but that does make sense, and in a way it will also help me from not being harmed in any way, shape, or form further than that point. So
yeah, those are some great points. And I think, and again, this could be a whole other conversation because so much has changed with, women deserve to be respected, but still aren't in many cases and haven't been through the years, where to the point where catcalls were actually, but some women felt, and again, I'm not trying to shame anybody, but like felt almost validated, like it was a good thing, like, oh, they're acknowledging that I'm attractive or whatever. And, I don't know. I think that's a whole different conversation, but catcalls in general are not exactly I don't think they're coming from a good place. Usually they're meant to objectify women, I mean, and that is something, and I'll transition here because I want to ask you your thoughts. I'm someone who runs, and, women, as runners, you get the, if not a cat call, definitely, like I've seen from honestly more older men than anything, who will stare, and it's like, believe me, I'm not wearing a tube top. I'm pretty, I have my t-shirt and my shorts on, but, they'll stare, and there's, sometimes comments, but like for me, the comments, thankfully I haven't had a lot, but like you do get the stares or whatever. A lot of the comments that I actually like are more like not comments, but like hello, good morning, like like conversation with a lot of different men. And, if I'm running, they might be like, yeah, great job, or keep going. I love those kind of encounters, and I will always, want those, and engage with people, but it's the stares and the weird stuff. But what I wanted to ask you about, and your thoughts on this now, again, don't feel that, comparing to what Robert said, but he will sometimes more or less chide me for this and scold me, but I do run often by myself. And, while he's like, oh, Janine, here you go. But the thing about this, that kind of, and maybe because he is a man, and I don't know if you'll have a different take on it, as a woman, I know the world is how it is, right? And we can't necessarily change it overnight, but I don't want my power taken away. Oh, you've got to have someone else running with you. You've got to, because the reality is I don't have the same kind of schedule as a lot of my friends. I don't, not all of my friends are runners. So I do run a lot by myself. And usually in daylight. I'm not someone who's going to run in the dark. I'm not, and again, I'm not judging people who do, if you do it as a group. I don't run in the dark. I run in the daylight. And maybe sometimes I'm over assuming that it will be okay. But I do feel as long as I'm, in the daylight and I have my phone and I'm close to, people, for me, it works for me. But, it's funny. Robert has said to me, Janine, you shouldn't be running by yourself. But I don't want women to have to feel like they have to change their lives because of this. I'm sure too, this is where maybe the self-defense class would come into play. Learn as much as you can, be as prepared as you can. So in case something does happen, you're prepared.
Yeah. And that, like I said, that 4 Ps is exactly what you're reaching at there. There's no reason why you should feel the need to completely change your lifestyle and the way that you do things because all of a sudden you've been introduced to an idea or a framework of mind that any situation you could be in could be a dangerous one. The fact of the matter is you could be out on a run and get in a dangerous situation. You could be in the safety of your own home. Like you can, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen wherever it happens. Hopefully it never does. But like you said, being able to know yourself, know that I'm not going to have to do so much extra work to do something that I love and that means a lot to me and is part of my everyday routine and who I am. And so, like you said, running in daylight, making sure that your phone is on you. My big thing is a lot of people, and I'm a culprit of this too, like I'll put headphones in and listen to music when I'm running. I try not to do that anymore so that I am aware of my surroundings and can hear what's going on around me, simply from just safety from cars and other things besides just somebody who could be there in a potential threat. But those would be the certain things. And like I said, coming to trainings and just having a little bit of a background on how to physically defend yourself if you were maybe alone on a run somewhere. And something were to happen. And then, yeah, you probably make sure that the places that you run, you do also feel safe in, that you know that you're around public places where if you, felt like you needed to get away from something, you're close enough to maybe a group of people that you could, get help from or just avoid. So I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say, don't run by yourself, but just take those steps that aren't going to necessarily change the thing that you want to do, but just make it a little bit better is all I would say. Just tweak it a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't say that you're wrong in your decision-making process, but just being smart and being prepared. Yeah. Especially knowing that you're going to be by yourself. I think that's part of the battle too. I think, somebody who runs by themselves, but they're not in the framework of, well, I am by myself, which does make me a potential target if anything were to happen. Already knowing that being isolated is something that people will look for. If, let's say, they wanted to take something like your phone or, if they thought you had a wallet on you or whatever, having that knowledge is just also going to help you be safely on alert, which is half the battle to me, truly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we all make mistakes. I used to occasionally, I would trail run, and I'll admit, I love the nature part of it, but there are times where I'm like, oh boy, there's not a soul out here, but that also would scare me a little bit. Like by myself, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be running out here by myself. But other times, yeah, I'm typically running where I do feel comfortable. I'm, close to a neighborhood or a business or something like that. So yeah, as you said, I think it is, being prepared and having the information, but it also couldn't help to take a workshop to learn from you guys.
Absolutely.
So as we I want to wrap up in a little bit here, but before we do, I definitely want to talk about what kind of workshops you have coming up. But also, before we do that, excuse me, and talk about those, is there any other aspect of this, especially as we're getting into this time, the red zone, that you wanted to bring up that we didn't talk about? Just something that you're like, ooh, this is an important point I really want to make.
If anything, I would just like to emphasize specifically for women going off to college or going back to college during this time frame, whatever age, honestly, to always just make sure that you check in with yourself and what you are okay with. We have a little saying in our women's classes that is know your no. So you need to be able to know the things that you are not okay with before you ever have to deal with making that decision in the first place. And your no's can change over time. The things that you may not be comfortable with may change. The things that you are comfortable with may also change, and you might not be comfortable with them anymore. And it may change per circumstance and person. And that's just something I feel like every woman should be able to do on a semi-regular basis, is to really just be able to check in and know that you have the right to be safe, and you also have the right to be respected in the way that you choose. And being able to actually know the things that you're okay with and not okay with is only going to allow you to show up for yourself better and have other people show up for you better, and set that precedent. So that would be something I emphasize so much, because I think that's such an empowering thing to think about. It's so simple, and it doesn't seem like something that we have to really sit down and try and reflect and figure out, but it really is. And is also a process of just getting to know yourself better. Not necessarily trying to go out and people please and go through experiences where then you figure out what that is, but in the moment be able to say, okay, like this is what I'm feeling today, this is what I want to do, and be okay with that and stick to your guns is, I think, so empowering and gives such a level of confidence to women that for a long time I feel like we go through a lot in life where those things get mitigated in very subtle ways. And even like I've been the kind of person where I'm like, oh, like I don't have that issue, or like that's not a thing for me. And then I find out like, oh, okay, like I did just kind of like compromise myself there, or I did just kind of diminish my position here in some way, shape, or form. So that would be the one thing I would emphasize the most, more than anything else. And
Okay.
our trainings really do provide that and give you the tools and just the community and the space to be able to figure out how to do that yourself.
That's important. So that's a perfect segue to what have you got coming up? I think for folks to follow you guys on Instagram, Facebook, but also the website, and I will put the website link in the show notes, because you're always having a lot of different workshops. Usually there are at least two parts. I think the one I took might have been, it was one of the shorter ones, but you also have ones that are a series. And of course, as I said, people can reach out to you guys if, they have an organization or they have a group they want to train. But what have you got anything specific you wanted to plug or promote that's coming up maybe in September or October?
So basically, if we do monthly events at our studio in Taylor, as well as at Roll Call in Scranton, we'll usually do our bigger events or more, multiple group events at Roll Call because their space is a little bit bigger. I always say, check the Facebook for those events. We're going to be having more weapons defense classes, which, people like to learn about and understand, something that a lot of us don't always think about, but we hear things all the time. We'll be doing more Reduce the Risks, which is for women It's sexual assault prevention and mitigation classes. So we'll have those also coming up in September and October. And you can also always schedule private classes as well, whether it be with a group of women. It could be mother and daughter classes. It could be, like right now, we've taught in the past 2 weeks, maybe 10 classes to groups of girls going off to colleges that just put it together with a couple of their friends before they go away. So we offer private classes all the time that can be catered to specific things that you're looking for. And yeah.
That's great. And I know the one that I took, I think it was like kind of a combination, but you mentioned the reduce the risk, I think, with sexual assault. So there, I know in the one that I took, you're actually teaching really important moves, whereas if you are attacked, like
Yes.
lying down or something in your home, how to get out of that situation, which I think, again, every woman should learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And like our classes, another reason why I felt so empowered in them is because it really isn't always about your size, your age, your physical, capabilities, your athleticism. It really is just body mechanics and understanding the kind of physics and physiology of how the body works. And so I love teaching it because every woman that I teach is always so pleasantly surprised to be like, I never thought I'd be able to do something like that. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. You just need to know the principles. You need to know how your body moves and how it works. And you can help to mitigate and stop a lot of things. So I highly, highly recommend those classes. And then, of course, our street defense for women classes, which are more just honed in and more generalized to things that you may, encounter just in everyday scenarios, whether it would be an attack that could be from a man or not. It could be from anybody. So, yeah.
That's great. It's interesting. I mean, I was terrible at physics, but it's so funny because, in the ones I took with you and years ago with the Kung Fu based ones, it's so much about removing, like not overexerting and using your power, and then knowing how to understand, like how to get them to, divert their power or different things like that. When it's different moves, it's like, yeah, physics is involved in understanding those principles. I think you're right. It is so interesting because you're like, okay, I don't have to be a bodybuilder to like fight back or defend myself. It's just understanding those moves, which are essential.
Mm-hmm. And even just the principles, like I loved, and Robert makes this distinction all the time, that we're not necessarily based in martial arts. We are very much reality-based self-defense. So we don't teach maneuvers or techniques or moves, we teach principles. So, what happens when you take these classes is you're going to learn kind of almost like a list of 12, I want to say, specific things about your own body that can be applied in multiple scenarios. So what we try to do is make it easy and concise and simple so that you can retain that muscle memory and under duress be able to recall it, instead of have too many things to remember or have to remember a specific scenario to go through. You can be like in that docket of 12 particular principles, you can be like, oh, this applies here, I could do this right now. And it doesn't matter if you're standing, someone's got you from behind, or if you're on the ground, or if you're in like a seated position, you can find your way through these principles to problem solve a lot of situations, which to me was just eye-opening. Because a lot of times I feel like a lot of people don't take self-defense classes because they are intimidated by the fact that, oh, is this going to be a martial arts? Am I physically going to be able to do this? Am I even going to remember anything that I do here? And when I took the first program with Robert 7-8 years ago, I retained so much information. I never thought I would. I was teaching a girl who's going off to college. She came a year or two ago to classes, and so we were just refreshing her on certain things. She had it right off the bat. Like with that, it was just muscle memory to her, and she hadn't been to a class in that long. And to me, I'm like, that's where the system works, is something that it stays with you. Hopefully you're going to be better at it if you keep staying at it, but it's something that will absolutely stay with you.
Yeah. And that's a great point because I do recall Robert saying that because, yeah, you're right. If it's a certain move, martial arts move, you might be like, okay, how did that go again? Or what was the choreography of that? But yes, he did make it clear that it's things that you can remember or, and obviously the more you do them, the more that but yeah, the basics that you'll remember and that will assist you if you ever need them, that you can use them. Yeah, that's a great point.
Mhm.
Um, let's give, as we close up here, I want to give a shout out. You mentioned at the top of the show that you and your sisters have a yoga studio. I wouldn't want just give a shout out to that, just because I think it's always great to support local. In Old Forge, what is the name of the studio and what do you offer? Just to give you guys a plug.
So it's Namaste 919, and we are in Old Forge, Pennsylvania, right off of South Main Street. We offer yoga classes at our studio. My sister's a massage therapist, so we have massage therapy there. We also hold different events and workshops for meditation and healing, as well as we also have a salt booth, which provides relief for the sinuses and the upper respiratory system through dry salt therapy, kind of like salt caves, but a little bit more personalized. So yeah.
Great. And I think honestly, these things go hand in hand. It's good to take care of our bodies, take care of our minds, take care of, just our wellness overall. And I think they do go well together. And I will say my friend Tina Gallagher, who's a romance author, is a frequent client of your sister's for massage therapy. It's funny. We often talk about that. She's there like, I want to say maybe once a month or twice a month, but she loves it there. Yeah.
Oh, we love Tina. She's the best.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we close up, I'll just say I want to thank you so much for your time, Margaret, and for this valuable information. And I mean, again, women who are listening, we have to pay attention to this all year round, but I think this time of year is especially key. So if you do have a daughter going off to school, or if you have a niece or a granddaughter or anyone these are important tips. So share this podcast with them, share Tsunami Self-Defense. They do a lot of workshops pretty much every month, and reach out if you want something private. If you have a couple women you want to get together, it's really key, important information. And I think it helps a lot of people. So thank you so much, Margaret. I do appreciate your time.
And thank you for the opportunity. I love talking about Tsunami self-defense systems, especially from the perspective of being a woman and how we are such a woman-centered practice. And it was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And as I said to my listeners, check out when I promote the podcast, I will share the link to Tsunami Self-Defense, but check them out on Facebook and Instagram. They do post a lot of great stuff, not just promotional stuff, but some interesting points, valuable information and videos. So check that out. And, as we continue on next month, we're, oh my gosh, August, September, we have a lot of different interesting topics coming up, serious topics, suicide prevention and awareness comes up in September, and a lot of other topics that, just every week, as I said, I like to feature a different woman who has something to share to help inform, inspire, and sometimes even entertain along the way. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.